Hi, welcome. This is Theology Therapist, and I am Hannah Brents. And today I want to leave a little bit of a shorter episode today because I want to hear from you. So I'd like to talk about true love waits and purity culture in evangelical circles. This was mostly a thing during the 90s. It's kind of since faded out. But I'd like to hear from you if you have experienced this or heard about this, been a part of this, and what your experience is, what you'd like to learn about purity culture, true love waits, the impacts, etc. So that'll come and I'll remind you about that at the end of the video, but I wanted to preface to say that this might be a little bit shorter than usual, but that's because I'd like to just sort of leave time to hear from you more about what you'd like to learn or hear about from. First, I just want to explain briefly what it is. So, True Love Waits was a movement in the 90s where in evangelical Christian churches, circles, communities, where there would be ceremonies. They kind of varied in nature. They could be as much as like a ball, right? To just more simple ceremonies, to kind of individual things. And at these ceremonies, teens, adolescents, and this was who the ceremony was for, would make a pledge to be sexually pure, to keep their virginity until after marriage, right? And so what became a part of these ceremonies was kind of paraphernalia, if you will. So what started popping up was rings. What would happen was parents would gift their teen a ring, and it was like this ring ceremony, if you will. And I think a lot of times there was a contract that was even signed by the teen and the parents that they were sort of like contracting to remain a virgin until after they were married. It could be the mom and the dad, or it could be just the dad that would give this ring to the teen. Clearly it was like targeted for teen girls, but I did know guys as well who went through these. They had true love waits rings and everything. And so they would have this ring ceremony, we would sign the contract, they would kind of commit in front of all of their peers and their peers' parents to remain sexually pure before marriage. And that commitment was like made to and with your parents, right? Like if you're signing a contract. So there is this weird dynamic, okay, about what, as somebody is, as a like adolescent, as a teen is aging into adulthood, what their like sort of sex relationship is going to be, what their relationship with their self is. I just want to first take a second, break down like True Love Waits itself. So this curriculum, this program, if you will, is based off of a passage, a few verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, which is in the New Testament in the Christian Bible. And it essentially says that it is better to stay single, to remain unmarried, but if someone cannot do that, it is better to marry than to burn, is like sort of how it's translated in a lot of versions, or to burn with passion, you know. It's also like interesting that if we're thinking about language, this is sort of my academic background here, looking at religious texts. So it's interesting that they translated it as to burn. Was that an like Old English allusion to a sexually transmitted infection? By like assuming that if you did that, or if you didn't wait, that you would then contract that. Because that's not what the ancient text is saying, but our translators are saying something as well. Kind of interesting, no? So they take this verse or this message from a few verses, and they essentially develop this whole sort of sex education, or non-sex education as it were, program to like educate's the word that's coming out, but the thing is, it's like based off of non-education program for adolescents. And it was right in the 90s, so the Christian right was becoming concerned with, it was like right after the AIDS crisis, they were concerned with the kind of decline of marriage, the kind of prevalency of marriage in the US, and the concern over the rise of sexual activity. So then we have essentially the popularity, right? In the 90s and even early 2000s, the evangelical Christian group and movement is like full force. It's a huge group of people in the US. So these ceremonies, true love wait ceremonies, they become more and more popular. It's like a wave of popularity, right? I'm sure a lot of us have experiences or friends, or maybe you know of somebody who's been through one. What's the problem, you ask me, with true love waits and virginity pledges and purity pledges and ceremonies between teens and their parents? Well, aside from the just general weirdness of it all, there was a study that's now outdated, but followed the purity pledge movement and conducted research within the sort of rise and height of it. And so in 2001, researchers out of Yale and Columbia published and found this statistic to be that 88% of purity pledgers had premarital sex. So clearly, it didn't work. There are a lot of implications of purity culture that, since I want to keep today fairly short, I'm not going to go into today. I might, and also depending on what you want to hear about, talk about that in the coming weeks. But one of my biggest issues, like in my master's programs and the things that I studied, because it makes me so mad. It makes me so mad is that when teens are not given a proper sex education, they are ill-equipped to make smart sex choices. And we know that that is paramount because 88% of adolescents, even in the height of purity culture, still chose to have premarital sex. This is so important because one thing that researchers have found that did happen as a result of purity pledges is in about 34% of teens, it did actually delay sexual initiation. So they waited longer or waited until they were older, basically, to have sex, right? So that means, like, I'm not great at math. So let's say in about 60% of people still did, or it didn't delay their age when they first had sex. But in 34% of people, it did delay. And in those people, they were 1/3 less likely to use a condom. Another thing that's really important about this is that some researchers in the journal published an article in the Journal of Religion and Health that there's a relationship between religiosity and risky sex practices. So these researchers found that religiosity predicts a broad range of sexual behaviors. Not only the transition to your first sex experience, sex without a condom, or risky sexual behaviors, but that religiosity is also associated with important specific transitions in sexual behavior and on the expression of non-intercourse related behaviors such as kissing and holding hands. The last stat that I'll kind of throw at you for today is that teens or adolescents who have a high level of religiosity also tend to report lower in research studies. So there's a reason for that, but they might choose options that are sort of more vague and we'll say less incriminating, if you will, in terms of being truthful about your sexual experiences or their sexual experiences. So there's a reason for that. That's because, as you might be thinking as you're listening to this, these purity ceremonies are kind of cringe, right? And so there's a whole aspect of shame that takes over afterwards, right? You're like, okay, because if I've got a true love waits ring on, and then if I can't take this ring off, but if I take it off, what is that? It's like I'm telling the world that, like, I've had sex. It's like this really weird is the best. I say everything is weird, but like it is the best feel like word to, it's so uncomfortable for teens to like have that sort of proclamation of like, oh, I've now sort of like I didn't keep my pledge. And then like what if the parents are still religious, are they going to ask about that? Or like, okay, so there's a huge aspect of shame here. Shame is a huge part of this because it says that all sex is bad, all types of like sex behavior, anything remotely sexual is bad until after you're married, and then it's all good and you got to do it all the time until you get pregnant and you have babies, right? So this is really bad because that creates that aspect of shame is what has these teens reporting things sort of less honestly, right? They might, instead of saying, yes, I've had sex, like, yes, I've had intercourse, they're going to tend to choose answers that are more vague and less incriminating in terms of like this mentality, okay? The other reason why this is so important is because when someone isn't given a proper education about sex, what it is, how to do it, how to say no, when should you say no, what, like all of that stuff, safe sex practices, what happens is that people are not equipped, teens especially, young adults, they are not equipped to choose safe sex practices. There's also this issue of consent. When you're not given a proper sex education, you're not sort of equipped or empowered to say yes or no. And so the SAGE journals, which is it's a medical journal, these researchers found that there is a correlation between purity culture, intrinsic religiosity, purity culture, and the rape myth acceptance. So rape myths are stereotypical prejudice and false beliefs about sexual assaults. So they are what is used to excuse sexual aggression, create hostility towards victims, and bias criminal prosecution. So that's huge. Seriously, like that's huge. But I have known myself people within this community who were married, and because in this community it's like man and wife, right? Like husband and wife. There's also this sort of homophobia, transphobia here. So here we go. This gender and sexual identity is also like an aspect of this that I'm not going to get into today. But when wives are told that once they are married and they are supposed to be having all the sex and crazy sex, that they're supposed to do whatever their husband wants whenever he wants because men can't control themselves and women hold the power to control men and to tempt them and etc. So a wife needs to be available to her husband, right? Which is an avenue for that kind of rape myth that this research article is talking about. Okay, I've talked a lot longer than I expected to today. So I'm going to stop. I want to hear from you. Have you had experience with true love waits or purity culture? Have you known anyone who's done that? Or does it just sound totally crazy to you? Leave it in the comments. Let me know. Like I mentioned, this was my thesis, so this was most of what I studied in graduate school. And so that statistics part of this is really important to me, because I think it has the potential to do such harm. So are you interested in the statistics as well? Or kind of talk to me about where you're at. What do you want? Let me know. I hope that you have a great week. It is so great to see you here. As always, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and press that subscribe button now and leave a comment for me below so I know where you're at and what you're wanting. Be well.